All right. Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Shakayla Alvarenga. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Mob Museum. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's program, Art Heists Inside the FBI's Pursuit of Stolen Masterpieces. So if you are an art enthusiast or a crime-solving aficionado, well, tonight's program will certainly be of interest to you. Former FBI Special Agent Robert Wittman, a name synonymous with his expertise in tracking art thieves, is here to share his prestigious 20-year career with us. As the leader of the FBI's National Art Crime Team, Wittman has orchestrated the recovery of stolen art and priceless artifacts. During this program, he will provide insights into the meticulous undercover operations that brought him face to face with the world's most notorious art thieves. But what truly sets Robert Wittman apart is his role in one of the most audacious art heists of our time, the $500 million theft from the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston. Following this discussion, there will be a book signing where you'll be able to meet Mr. Wittman after the program, and a special thank you to the FBI Las Vegas Citizens Academy Alumni Association, an organization dedicated to fostering community awareness, for their assistance in tonight's program. Please give Mr. Wittman a round of applause.
Stolen paintings and founded the FBI's National Art Crime Scene. I hear a lot of the suspects have been framed. Please welcome Robert K. Wittman. Hey, Mr. Wittman, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Shakayla, you did a great job. It was a wonderful introduction, but I always liked Mr. Colbert's better because it's always a fun one, you know. I wanted to say thank you to an individual tonight, too, as well, who's here. Who's not here, it's Michaela, was someone who I've worked with here at the museum who was very helpful in getting some of the media together for us. So Shakayla and Michaela both did a great job, and I want to thank them both for having me here. And also, if Ray Johnson would stand up. I think he's right here in front. Ray Johnson is the Assistant Special Agent in charge. He's the actual FBI guy here in Las Vegas. So if you got any problems, call Ray. He's your man. He's the guy you need. Thank you, Ray, for coming out tonight, representing the office, having me here. It turns out I've known Ray for, I guess, 20 years. Because he was in Atlanta and had some cases involving a Mayan codex that I remember getting a call on and working a little bit with headquarters, working with Ray. So it turns out it's a small world, you know, it's a really small world. So we're going to talk about art crime tonight, art theft. And before we do that, we do have to figure some things out. There's going to have to be some interesting facts that we're going to learn. And one of those is the art industry statistics. Now, around the world, the art industry is a $200 billion worldwide industry. Think about that, $200 billion a year. That's the legitimate art market. And 40% of that, the biggest part of it, is sold in the United States, about $80 billion a year. So it's one of our very, very large markets here in the United States, 80 billion. And you know, when I was at the FBI and even today, when we talk about the art crime team, we talk about art in general, we mean cultural property. It's everything. It's not just sculptures, prints, and paintings. It's also things like magazines, comic books, antique cars, different types of watches, antiques in general, all of these things. International pieces such as Peruvian artifacts, artifacts from Egypt, Iraq, the Middle East, Africa. These are all part of the art world. So that's all what the FBI does investigate. And what I look into today in my own company, which is Robert Wittman Incorporated, we still do these things. So back around 2001 or so, I got a phone call. It was our headquarters PR people, our media relations people. And they said that the New York Times had asked them, what is the size? Give us an estimate of the size of the art crime industry worldwide. So they called me because I was kind of doing most of the art material. And I contacted my individuals I knew, my counterparts at the OCBC, which is the Organized Crime Bureau in Paris, which does art theft investigation. And I spoke to Scotland Yard, to the Art and Antique Squad. I also talked to Interpol. And I even spoke with the Carabinieri, which is not easy since I don't speak Italian. But we found somebody who could speak English. Angelo Ragusa is a captain. He's still there. He's still a captain. Anyway, we talked to him. And we came up with a figure of about $6 billion a year. That's the illicit cultural property market worldwide every year. And what I've heard is that it's gone up because the price of art has gone up. Just recently, a few years ago, the most expensive painting in the world sold for over $400 million. It was a Da Vinci called the Salvator Mundi, a painting of Jesus. And it sold for $400 million to to MBS in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be the centerpiece of his museum. Think about that, a painting. This is a piece of canvas with oil paint on it, right? $400 million because it was by Da Vinci. At least, if you saw The Lost Da Vinci, the movie, I say in there, at least they say it's by Da Vinci. So, but there's always a doubt. But $400 million. So that's what's happened with the art market. So now it's a $6 billion illicit cultural property market. It's probably more than that at this point. But at that time, that's what it was. So the question is, why do people steal art? Why do they go out and do this? Well, it's all about the money. There was a famous bank robber who at one point was caught. His name was Willie Sutton. And a reporter asked him as he was being let off to jail, Willie, why'd you rob the banks? And Willie said, well, because that's where the money is. Well, when we talk about the art market today, take a look at this. This is part of the cultural property, the art market of the United States. Recently, this Tom Brady rookie card signed sold for $2.25 million. Action Comics, Superman #1. Now it's old. It's from the 1930s. Sold for $3.5 million. Mario Brothers. How many of you have Mario Brothers at home? Have you got kids from the 80s and early 90s? I do. And I've been looking for their Mario Brothers game. When this happened last year, I thought, hell, I'm going to get me one of those, I'm sure we got it around here somewhere. $660,000 for that Mario Brothers game. And this is the most amazing to me. This was in the last 16 months. This Mickey Mantle rookie card, now it's in good shape. I mean, it's a piece of cardboard about this big. It's not signed. It sold for $12 million. $12 million. Now, if you can't buy a Mickey Mantle baseball for less than $1,000, used to be you can get it for $100. Now it's $1,000 to get one because of that. But that's why people steal this stuff. It's not because they love it or they're collectors. It's worth a lot of money now. And these things get stolen. Now, you might not be able to steal that card and get $12 million, but I'll tell you what, if you find somebody that has a Mickey Mantle rookie card, a minimum card's going to be $5,000, even one in terrible shape now because one sold for $12 million. So if you have a Mickey Mantle rookie card, put it in your safe, okay? Put it away because it is now valuable. So that's what happens. That's why people get involved in art theft. That's why they steal cultural property. It's like Willie Sutton said, it's where the money is. The average bank robber, and Ray knows this, in the United States, the average bank robbery nets less than $1,000. And it's a federal crime. What's it punishable by? I forget. If it was a gun, I know it's a 5-year minimum mandatory. But I don't know, a regular bank robbery, probably a couple of years, right, prison? Well, think about that. $5,000 to rob a bank. I mean, you get less than $1,000. You steal a Mickey Mantle rookie card. That's not a federal violation, by the way, unless it goes across a state line. So if you steal it in Las Vegas and keep it here, it's worth $12 million. And it's not federal. So, why would you rob a bank? It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. But that's the thing. So what protects you? Well, these are the statutes that the FBI art crime team and Ray's office here in Las Vegas, these are the ones they would investigate. At least I think they would. Things have changed over the years, but these are the statutes that protect our citizens, all of us, from these thieves. And very quickly, interstate transportation of stolen property. If someone steals something worth $5,000 or more and transports it over a state or international border knowing it to be stolen or has it transported, it causes it to be transported, it's a federal violation. It can be investigated by the FBI. I'll go skip the second one. The next one's Hobbs Act robbery. That means if someone robs, say, a gallery, or a store selling artwork, and that gallery is in the business of doing commercial business, it could be a federal violation, punishable by many years in prison. Then there's smuggling. How many of you have been traveling overseas? Anybody? I know you do. I mean, I know you don't want to go anywhere but Vegas, but where else would you want to go, right? I mean, you go right down to Paris, right down the street, right? The Eiffel Tower's there. You got everything, the Egyptian pyramids. But truthfully, smuggling is a violation, and you have to be careful. I mean, just as a tip, I get calls quite often from people who have problems at the border, because what they do is they go overseas and they buy artifacts, not knowing them to be basically, banned in the United States. There's 18 countries that the United States has MOUs, what we call memorandums of understanding, which are treaties with, that ban those artifacts coming into the US. So just to give you an example, if you go to London and you go to the Bermondsey Flea Market and you buy some Roman coins or some Roman artifacts there at the Bermondsey Flea Market, which they have, all right? And you bring them back, that's banned, because we have an MOU with Italy, which bans that material from coming into the US. And it's funny, some of those coins, some of those things may never have been in Italy ever, because the legions were there, they had their own stuff. They made their own coins, but nonetheless, that's considered the cultural property of the country of Italy. So it just gives you an idea. You have to be careful. You won't get arrested. I mean, if you come back, unless you lie, if you lie to the customs agent, you might have a problem. But you're not going to get arrested for having it. You get arrested for lying, okay? So if you just tell the truth, if they seize it from you, say you lost your coin, okay? But that's something you have to think about before you buy these things. So that's smuggling. It's not Cuban cigars. I like Cuban cigars. I don't consider that smuggling, okay? Just my opinion. Just saying, okay? And then there's mail fraud and wire fraud. I call those the white-collar crimes of art crime. What I would tell you is if you're going to get a piece of art and it's valuable, if you buy it online, make sure that you get a contract or you get a receipt and it's sent to you some way, shape, or form, whether it's email or through the mail. The biggest complaint for the Cybercrime Center for the FBI basically is eBay fraud. People get ripped off on eBay. So if you're going to buy a Picasso on eBay, it happens. Make sure the Picasso has 2 S's, P-I-C-A-S-S-O. Oh, and there's no A in Monet, okay? Just saying. And that's how it happens. So just be careful. If you're going to buy these things, get a receipt, get something that says it's authentic. Although certificates of authenticity are probably valueless, about what they're worth is what the paper they're on. But just be sure you get a contract in the mail that states what it is, because if there's anything wrong with that contract, it could be a mail fraud or a wire fraud. So those are the basic violations that the United States government uses to protect you when you're involved in art theft or art types of situations as a victim. And the one we skipped was called theft of major artwork. And I skipped that one because if you look up there, there's only one statute that has the word art in it. All the rest of these are for many different types of things. But the theft of major artwork statute was passed in 1995, and it was put forth by Ted Kennedy at the time, who was a senator from Massachusetts. And what it basically says is anyone who steals an object of cultural heritage, which Congress defines as any object worth $5,000 or more and over 100 years old, that is in the care and custody of a museum in the United States, is an object of cultural heritage. Anyone who steals that from a museum has committed a federal crime. Now, that's interesting if you think about it. $5,000 or more, over 100 years old. Up until that time, stealing from a museum was no different than stealing from 7-Eleven. All right, it was a local violation. Now it's a federal violation. It's investigated by the FBI. And what's even more interesting is there's a secondary part of the statute. There's an A and a B. And what B says, anyone who conceals, travels, transports, conceals, tries to sell or exhibits an object of cultural heritage, that was stolen from a museum. Once they know that it's stolen, that they don't have to know it came from a museum. If they know it's stolen, it becomes the same as if they stole it. Do you see what I'm saying to you? So what's important is your due diligence. You know, I've had a case where an individual was selling a Renoir that was stolen from the Baltimore Museum of Art in 1950. As it turned out, because of this statute, once that person was notified that it was stolen from the Baltimore Museum of Art in 1950, her continuing possession of it and attempt to sell it was a federal crime. So she had to turn it over. So what they have to do, it means you have to turn it in. So it's a crime to continue to maintain it if it's stolen from a museum. So why do you think Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts would want to make it a crime to conceal, exhibit, transport an object of cultural heritage stolen from a museum? There must have been a big museum heist in Massachusetts, right? Yeah. Well, what happened was in 1990, there was a heist at the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston. How many people know about the heist? Anybody? I can't see anything. So, how many people don't know about it? If you don't know about it, say, yeah. Okay, I'll tell you about it. I can hear you, I can't see you. All right, so in 1990, two individuals dressed as Boston police officers, they went to the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston. And Ray, I thought, you know about this, right? Yeah, of course Ray knows. Have you ever had any leads on it? No. Okay. Well, you were in Atlanta, and here you wouldn't have had leads in Boston. Yeah, a bit east. Anyway, these guys went in 1990, and well, you weren't even around then, were you? No, you were a young man. Yeah. So these guys went in 1990 dressed as Boston police officers, and they were going in on St. Patrick's Day night. Now, you know how Boston is. You know, early in the morning on St. Patrick's Day night, it's rough. So they go in, and they tell these two guards that are in there that they had a fugitive warrant for one of them. Well, the guard was afraid, but his rules were never let anybody in, but of course, he let them in. Well, of course, they weren't police officers. They were thieves. So they tied these two guards up to poles in the basement, to pipes, and they went around the museum for the next hour and some odd minutes, and they stole 13 objects of art, 13 pieces. Total value of the heist that night was $300 million. They stole a Vermeer. It was the only Vermeer that's missing. It was called the Concert. It's the only one of about 35 in the world that's missing. They stole the only Rembrandt seascape in the world, The Storm over the Sea of Galilee. Another Rembrandt they stole called The Gentleman. So a number of pieces, about 300 million total. This law was passed in '95, and today, none of these pieces have ever been recovered. Not one out of the 13, which is really unusual. And I want to tell you, today there's a $10 million reward for the recovery of the paintings, or leads for the recovery of the paintings. So if any of you know where they're at, call me, I'll call Ray. And I'm not in the FBI anymore, so I'll get the reward with you. Okay. And we'll work this out, okay? And Ray's an attorney too, he can represent us. So this is all good. So $10 million today for the return of the paintings. And that's really unusual. Throughout my career, one of the biggest things we would do is always put up a reward, because that always brought, interesting leads out of the woodwork. We had many times paintings. There was one case where a Goya was stolen. It was in transit from Toledo Museum of Art to the Guggenheim. And as it was being transported across country, the transporter stopped at the Pennsylvania Turnpike at Scranton, and they spent the night in a motel there. Well, of course, the next morning they walk out to the truck, and the crate's gone. Well, we put out a news release, and we said there was a $25,000 reward. Within a week, we had an individual calling in. It was an attorney who said his client had the painting and wanted to turn it in for the reward. Yeah. He said his son had stolen it and hid it in a wall in his basement. So we did our investigation, and we found that his son was in prison. So obviously he didn't do it. So ultimately, that individual was convicted because he couldn't go before a grand jury and testify because he stole it himself. He was looking for equipment, transportation equipment and trucks, and he was stealing those types of things. Took the whole crate and got the Goya. So it was really neat. The New York Times, the paper, what was it? What's the paper? The Daily News. They had a front page picture of it, and they said, "Oh boya, it's a Goya." So I thought that was pretty clever at the time. Anyway, I digress. So with these rewards, they do bring people out of the woodwork. And so, but this $10 million, This has not brought it out of the woodwork. Now, I was involved in an investigation the last 3 years of my career out of Miami. I went to Miami, was undercover there. I worked undercover in Barcelona, Madrid, went to Paris, Marseille. It was just awful. But somebody has to do it. So anyway, so we did all those leads and investigations on 2 of the paintings. And we did recover 2 Picassos that were stolen worth $60 million, and 4 pieces that were stolen out of the Museum of Fine Arts in Nice, 2 Bruegels, a Monet, and a Sicily. And those were taken at gunpoint. We did get those back too, but we didn't get our 2 paintings, which was the Rembrandt and the Vermeer. So I still believe they're somewhere in the south of France. But until other things happen, maybe we'll be a while before we get them. So anyway, as a result, the theft of major artwork statute was passed, and that makes it a crime to steal from a museum, just like the Mob Museum. So everybody here, enjoy yourselves, have a great time, look around, but don't take anything, okay? It's a federal violation. So what are the public resources? Well, up until 2005, basically there was like 3 people in the country, in the United States. The Carabinieri had 300 members, 3 brigades, looking in Italy doing art theft investigation. And as I told you, the OCBC in Paris had 35 members. The Art and Antique Squad had 12 people. There were 2 squads in Madrid that did nothing but art. When we came to the United States, basically there was 3 guys. It was me, a guy named Jimmy in New York, and Ray occasionally in Atlanta, okay? We were the guys. Other than that, everybody else was just basically doing property crime. Because you have to understand, when it comes to the police and law enforcement, there's no difference technically between a Monet and a Chevrolet, okay? Yeah, it's property, it's property crime. And it's, what is it now, one of the lowest priorities of the Bureau? Okay, it's, I never heard that one. So property crime investigations are the lowest of the lowest, okay, in the Bureau. Now, we elevated the art part a little bit because they love the publicity, right? Everybody likes publicity, the Bureau does. So that's come up a little bit. There actually is a squad, and there's actually a desk now. When I left, there was no desk at headquarters. There's actually an art crime desk. So that's a good thing. But in 2005, we started the art crime team. I had gotten back from Sweden, doing an undercover there in Copenhagen, and recovering a Rembrandt. I'll tell you about that later. And then when I got back, I said, we need to do this like the other countries. So we went to headquarters, and we got permission to create this team. And it's now called the National Art Crime Team. And this was the logo that we created at the time in 2005. And I'll never forget, I was in Philadelphia. And I got a call from that same media person who was involved in, the earlier estimates on illicit property crime. And he said to me, hey, listen, Agent Wittman, we're trying to come up with a really good name for this team. He says, and we're not sure what to call it because we don't have one, never had one before. So I was sitting there and I was actually looking at all the applications. I expected to get maybe 10 applications for like the 8 positions. I had 75 applications came in that we were looking at around the country. So I'm looking at these applications and I'm thinking, well, it's art, it's cultural property, it's national, it's federal. How about the Federal Art Recovery Team? So, yeah, the Federal Art Recovery Team. So there was like a silence on the phone. And he said to me, I don't think that's going to work. I think it's a great name, don't you think? The Federal Art Recovery? So I said, what do you want to call it? He said, how about the Art Crime Team? I said, okay, that sounds great. I figured they could only do 3 letters. That's what it was. It's not a true story, but it could be. anyway, that's that was the logo. And if you look behind the letters, there's 10 paintings, 10 pieces of art, and a sculpture, 9 pieces of art and sculpture. At the time, these were the pieces that were missing in the world, and they were all stolen. And I can be happy to tell you that at least 4 of these at this point have been recovered. The Cellini salt cellar at the top, right there, that's been recovered in Vienna. This is a Da Vinci, Mother and Child, in Scotland. This Edvard Munch piece, The Scream, if you remember, it was stolen in Oslo. This piece here was recovered. This is a Van Gogh that was missing at the time. It was recovered out of a mobster's mother's house, her basement in Sicily. So that's been recovered. It was stolen from the Van Gogh Museum. So at least four out of the 10 pieces on the original Art Crime Team logo, which is still on the website, by the way, the FBI.gov website, 4 of those have been recovered. Now, none of those have the FBI had anything to do with, but we get credit because we had it on our website. So that's right, Ray? That's right. So anyway, that's the Art Crime Team. I'm happy to say that today they're still there. They've recovered about at least $200 million worth of material, lots of items around the world. But not everything can be taken to law enforcement. There are limitations. When I started my company in 2008, Robert Wittman Incorporated, we get involved in many different things. We do, art recovery services. We actually do go out and recover stolen art. We do museum security. I just did a security survey for the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. Collection management. When people come to us, they say, "What do you have? We want to know what we have." So I'll give you an example. I had a woman outside of Washington, D.C. in Montgomery County. And she called and she said, my family has these old trunks in the basement. There's a bunch of trunks. Can you come and take a look at them? Tell me what it is. And this is an old farmhouse on Potomac Road. Now, if you've ever been to D.C. on Potomac Road, there are no farmhouses, just mansions. Okay, but this was a farmhouse. So it was there for 150 years. So we went to the basement. The basement was all dirt. It wasn't even, finished or anything. It was just dirt floors. And there was these 20 trunks, these old steamer trunks. So we went over to Lowe's and we got these wire bolt cutters, and we cut the locks off. They're probably worth a lot of money, but who cares? And we cut the locks off. And we opened the trunks, and you know what was in them? Books. Books, but they were amazing books. About $3 million worth of books. They were original, Moby Dick, the first edition. Manuscripts from Teddy Roosevelt's books that he wrote. The family was related to the Roosevelt family. It was just amazing what we found. So just to give you an idea, that's collection management. This woman had inherited all these trunks, didn't know what was in them, hadn't been opened since the 1940s, and here we go. So we took them, we cataloged them for her, put them in fantastic, sleeves so that everything would be protected. And we said, "Do you want us to take it to like a very high quality storage unit for you?" And she said, "No, just put them in the bedroom." I said, "Okay." So that's where they are. They're in the bedroom in the farmhouse in Potomac, right? So, but that's what we do: due diligence, collection management, a lot of expert witness testimony for fraud cases. So that's a big deal too.
How is art crime committed? Because, from the movies, you see, a grid of lasers, and Catherine Zeta-Jones puts on a skin-tight suit, and somehow showing her butt helps get her through the grid.
Isn't that the truth? That's what we think of. When we think of art crime and stealing, paintings and things, it's Catherine Zeta-Jones. It's our famous Oscar-winning art thieves. Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery. The movie was called Entrapment. And of course, there's young Pierce Brosnan. He don't look like that anymore. He used to, but that was Thomas Crown Affair. Oh, by the way, if you buy the book out back when we're done, when I first came out with it, Pierce Brosnan called me. And he said, are you interested in doing a TV show with your book? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. I said, are you going to play the role? And he said, no, I'm a movie star. I said, well, it didn't work out. But the reason I tell you that is because I got his cell phone numbers for $50, ladies. I'll give you the cell phone number. It's in L.A. And of course, we got Sean Connery. When I talk to kids in college students and things, they have no idea who Cary Grant is, right? No idea. And in 1955, he did a movie called To Catch a Thief. He played a jewel thief. But these are what we think of. These are our Oscar-winning, handsome, beautiful, debonair, rich, intelligent. These are the art thieves. The longer you look at that, the funnier it gets. You go from that to that. These are the real thieves. Over the years, these individuals, I've arrested all of them and convicted them, and they represent about $4 million worth of stolen cultural property. Different cases, 3 different cases. You can see that one group, this one, and that one, they're all kind of dressed alike. They were all working together, obviously, you know. But, you know, that's what happens. These are the real thieves. They're not so handsome, not so beautiful, not so smart. And I'm going to tell you what they did. We're going to talk about 3 different types of thefts tonight. Insider theft, which is 90% of museum and institution theft. 90% in this country is insider. Now, that means it could be a curator, it could be a program manager, it could be a guard, or it could just be an expert who, you know, happens to come in and want to look at things. It's people who have the keys to the kingdom. But 90% of the time, we did research into all the cases the FBI has had. We found 89% was insider. Then I'm going to talk about a little bit about armed robberies and then burglaries, which are basically just break-ins. So the first one is going to be the Pensbury matter. And this one involves a break-in. So, you know, I used to work 9 to 5, except when I needed to work more days or whatever it would be. You know, we're always on duty. We had this thing called unlimited authorized overtime. They still have that? AUL? AVP? Well, now it's AVP. See, when I was there in 2008, I think it was AUL. But what happened was that meant you got paid 25% more to work 100% more time. Okay? Right? That's how it worked. So that meant you were on call 24 hours a day. But, you know, nothing would happen all week. I'd be there working, doing other cases and working and doing things. And every time something happened, it'd be on Saturday. So I'd be getting out of bed, and I get this phone call. And this call was from a state trooper. And he said, Agent Wittman, we had a problem. Last night we had a robbery, a break-in at the Pensbury Manor. Now, the Pensbury Manor is the original home of William Penn. Anybody here from Pennsylvania? I can't see. Say yeah if you are. Yeah, okay. Well, you know who William Penn is, right? Okay, everybody knows. William Penn was the founder of Pennsylvania, one of the first 13 colonies. You know, he's a big dude, okay? Anyway, this was his home. It was outside of Philadelphia in Bucks County. And he lived there and built that house from 1683 to 1700. And the reason I know that is because it says it on that plaque. You see that right there? I'm not a historian, folks. Anyway, so that's where he was. And he started Philadelphia and, you know, the birth of the nation, all that. So William Penn's there. He's yawning, and for me, it's 11 o'clock. You realize I'm from Philly, right? So anyway, so William Penn was there. And they got a break-in the night before. So I get the call. So we go up there on Saturday. And how many of you remember the first Mission Impossible movie? Remember Tom Cruise was coming down from the ceiling with that wire, and if one bead of sweat fell on the floor, what would happen? All the alarms would go off and everything, and all the police would come? Well, that's not what happened. So what happened was we get there, and right there on that door, there was a big muddy footprint, and it had rained the night before. So, you know, I was at the academy for 16 weeks, the FBI academy. So to me, that was a clue. I thought, that must have been where he kicked the door in. So I think that's what happened. So I was talking to the trooper. I said, that must be where he kicked the door in. The trooper said, yeah, I think so too. So we went in and we saw where they had gone through this house, and they stole about 37 items, all from William Penn's day. Some of them are reproductions, but total value at that time was about $350,000. And these pieces were basically 300 years old. So we started the investigation. And of course, we talked to 120 people who were docents and curators at the historic house, and we had nothing. We had no clues. Because that's the hardest type of crime to basically solve. You know, when it's an inside job, you've got leads. But when it's a burglary, it could be anybody. All we have is a muddy footprint, really, and no fingerprints or anything like that. Just a muddy footprint and some tire tracks, because it had been raining the night before. They had gotten away before the state police could arrive, because the alarm did go off. So we knew what time, and we knew they broke in. So that tells you it's not an inside job, because if it was an inside job, somebody could have left the door open. Right? They wouldn't have to kick the door in. So we did our investigation, and we did what all good law enforcement officers do after doing an investigation. We took the file and we put it on a shelf behind us and just waited for a break. And we got a break. About 6 weeks later, I get a phone call on Saturday morning. It's the trooper. He said, well, there was a guy last night. He was driving out I-95 in Philadelphia. And as he was doing that, he was weaving about 11 o'clock on Friday night. So a very observant young state trooper pulled him over. And as he walked up to the car, he got a bolo, be on the lookout on his radio, that said, somebody had robbed a pizza parlor in the town right there, Ben Salem, and stolen the safe in the pizza parlor. Well, this guy's got a traffic stop right here. It's 11 o'clock at night. He doesn't have really time to worry about that. Let me tell you, if you see a trooper pulled over, with somebody, and, give him a ticket, you can go as fast as you want because they're not looking at you. Okay. They're busy. So, and I know that from troopers who have told me that. So anyway, the thing was that he looks in, walks up to the car, and he looks at it, he says, license and registration. So this guy pulls it out. He gives him the license and registration. Everything's okay. He's got his flashlight, looks at it, looks at the guy's face, matches up. The guy looks a little red-eyed. Nothing too bad. He goes into the back, just looks into the back the back seat, underneath the driver's side. And he didn't go in. He just did what we call a wing spread search, which he just looked. He looks in, and he sees a safe. Well, that's a clue. Even for a young state trooper, that's a clue. Okay. As it turned out, of course, it was the safe from the pizza parlor. So this guy had just done a burglary at that pizza parlor and stole the safe and was drinking a few beers, too. So the trooper arrests him at that point, takes him in, and locks him up. Well, as it turned out, it was this guy right here on the end. So the next morning, Saturday morning, he says, I know about that Pennsbury Manor heist. I want some help on the charges, on these burglary charges. So we go up, we see him. And he tells us, yeah, I did it. There was 2 guys with me. He gives me their names, gives me the trooper their names. He says, we all did it together. We all were in the 5th grade, and we visited that at the historic home, and we all saw artifacts there. And the thing was, we got in the business of being pickers. So on Friday afternoons, they would go around picking trash to sell at the auction house on Tuesday. All right? This is what they were, pickers. You've all seen American pickers? Well, they ain't real pickers. Those guys are dealers. These were pickers. That's what they do. They pick trash. So they had no trash or no picks for the next sale. So they decided that Friday night, after getting a few beers, that they would go to that historic house and steal some good stuff for the auction. I didn't say they were smart. I just said this is what they wanted to do. So, of course, they ran in, they opened it up, stole 37 items, got away. Well, he gives us the name of these fellows. And I said to him, okay, well, where's the stuff? That's the most important thing. To me, it was always recovering the artifacts. And he tells us, well, they took it to my girlfriend's house. And it was all hidden in plastic bags in the garage. And the garage, it's in the back of that garage. So they give us the address. So the trooper and I, we go to the house that night. And we knock on the door. It's about 9 o'clock on Saturday night. And a man and a woman answer the door. And, of course, it's the parents. This girl's about 18, right? And, when the state police and the FBI show up at your door on 9 o'clock on Saturday night asking for your daughter, you got a problem, So she comes out and we say, okay, do you know this fella? She says, yeah. We said, well, where's the stuff? In the garage. And she said, well, it's in the garage. And we said, okay, well, let's go get it. And she says, didn't they tell you? I said, no, tell us what? She said, well, we threw it all in the river. And I said, why did you do that? And she said, well, because they got scared when they saw all the newspaper articles on the front page of the local paper, this big heist. They told us to get rid of it, so we took it all down to Philadelphia. We threw it in the Delaware River. Okay, so we took it in the car. We went down there. We went to where she showed us where they threw it into the river. And, of course, the next morning we put the dive team from the Philadelphia Police Department into the river. And we were lucky. We started pulling some things up. And remember, this is 6 weeks after the heist. So we actually were able to recover about 32 items, all those pieces. If you notice, though, all those pieces are made of steel and pewter, aren't they? They're not, they're not all of them. So we did do well. We recovered probably about $275,000. We lost this, which was a jewelry caddy, owned by Mrs. Penn, probably one of the finest ones in existence at that time. And that's gone. We lost it. It's worth about 70 grand. Okay? I mean, it floated down the Delaware River, which is a tidal river. So unfortunately, we did get a lot back, but we didn't get it all. And that's the real terrible situation when it comes to art heists. You have the situation where you might actually lose something of great value. And it's not the money. It's the fact that your children, and now my children and grandchildren, I got 4 grandchildren, they'll never be able to look at that piece and see the real piece. They can look at a picture, but they'll never be able to feel it, touch it, smell it, have any access to it, because it's gone. So we failed. Our generation failed. We did not protect that. All right, we got the other pieces, but that's what we have to do. We have to protect our heritage and our history, because once it's gone, we lose our heritage and history. So I told you this story because this was the first case in the United States where that theft of major artwork statute, remember that one was passed for the Isabella Gardner Museum? Well, we used that for prosecution. They were all three prosecuted, got 4 years prison sentences based upon the fact that this material was worth $350,000, was over 300 years old, and it was stolen from a museum. So we were able to do that for the first time. It's been used many times since, but that was the first. It was appealed and upheld by the Third Circuit of Court of Appeals in Philadelphia, but that was the first. Though that was a burglary. So let's do a quick theft by insiders. This was at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. We got a call. It was the archivist. Her name was Kristen. And Kristen was a nice young lady. She's a blonde-haired woman, nice, very, very pretty, nice, did a lot of good work. And she called and she said, well, I had just moved 3 swords and a long rifle from an exhibit, and I put it downstairs onto a table. And today I noticed they weren't there. And I had been, I couldn't remember moving them. I talked to everybody in the museum, and nobody moved them. So, we got to try to find out where they are. So myself and a U.S. attorney, by the way, who was with me at the time, we went up to the museum. And we said, well, you have no idea where they are. And she said, no. And these 3 swords were owned by 3 Civil War generals, David Birney, A.A. Humphreys, and General George Meade. All told, the value of the swords was about $750,000. These were presentation swords, 3 of the finest presentation swords in existence. In fact, the one that was given to George Meade was a Tiffany that was given to him in 1864 after the Battle of Gettysburg. And it was inscribed from the citizens of Pennsylvania, citizens of Philadelphia, for his gallantry against the rebel hordes at Gettysburg. And believe it or not, they paid $1,000 at the time for that sword, which was worth $350,000 today. So George Meade, that was his presentation sword. He was the Union leader at Gettysburg. So these 3 swords are missing. We go talk to Kristen. We say, Kristen, you need to look all around and make sure they're not here. So there was some ducting. We made her go climb up in the ducting because I wasn't going to do that. And she went over to the top of the shelves and all that and looked, and nothing there. And there was no break-in. So what's that tell you? That tells you it's probably an inside job, isn't it? No break-in, no burglaries, no alarms. Nobody knows where these things are. Probably somebody from the inside had something to do with this. So we started doing what we were supposed to do. We investigated. We talked to everybody at the museum. This historical society has been here since 1812. It's the 2nd oldest in the country. Boston, Philadelphia, New York, the 3 oldest. So they had over 12,000 items in it. But these 4 were very, very valuable. Well, we talked to 175 people. Everybody had anything to do with the museum. We were doing this investigation in conjunction with the Major Crimes Division, the Philadelphia Police Department. And we had nothing. And in fact, at one point, we did talk to one person we didn't talk to one person who wasn't there the day he was scheduled. He was sick. He had a doctor's note and everything. And he had been there for 20 years. He was the most trusted guy in the place. No problem. We figured we'd get to him later. His name was Ernie Medford. So Ernie was okay. Everybody else we were able to talk to. So I got an idea. There was a big Civil War show in Richmond, Virginia, which is about 140 miles south of Philadelphia. And my partner and I, we decided we're going to go down to the show and maybe show some pictures and see if any of these dealers had any leads on these swords. Because everybody in the industry knows everything. They know where everything is. That's why they're dealers. So we went down there and we talked to everybody. We had pictures of the swords. We met one guy, a guy named Bruce Bazelon, who worked for the Pennsylvania Historic Commission. And believe it or not, Bruce had actually published a self-published pamphlet, a book, that had all the presentation swords of Pennsylvania in it, which was pretty cool. And it had pictures of our 3 swords in the book with a little write-up on each one, not because they were stolen, because they were known. So I bought one of the books from Bruce because I thought that was a cool memento, and I had him sign it for me, just like you're going to do when we get done with this. And Bruce said, but he said, there was something interesting happened, Bob. He said, there was a dealer in the Poconos, and he called me because a guy came into his shop, and he said he had a sword like one of the ones the dealer had, which was a presentation sword. And he said that it was a presentation to this Major Smith. Well, that's not one of the ones we're looking for. Okay, that wasn't, so what? Well, Bruce said, well, that sword is supposed to be in the Historical Society. Oh, interesting. But it wasn't one of the ones we're looking for. It wasn't missing. So we got back to Philadelphia, and we called the Historical Society, and they said, no, we have it. It's here. So there must be something strange. Ultimately, though, Bruce did have the guy's name, the collector who had come in, and because he needed a part for a Civil War Confederate gun, and he was hoping a dealer could get it for him. So he had his name and address. So my partner and I, it was December 23rd, we figured, it was on the way home, so we could leave early and go visit him and then go home early, right? Christmas. And we figured nothing's going to come of it. So we go to this house. It's a little row house. It's maybe 12 miles south of Philadelphia. And I knock on the door, and a young lady answers the door. It was his daughter. And we say to him, is George home? The guy's name was George. And she said, no, he's at work. I said, what does he do? And she said, he's an electrician. I said, does he have a Civil War collection? And she said, I don't know what he's got. And she said, I don't really live here. I'm just visiting. Okay, well, where's his office? So she gives us the name of the office. It's down the street. We go down, and we see the foreman. We say, is George here? And he says, no, he's out on the street. We'll call him and bring him in. Yeah, tell him the FBI wants to talk to him. It usually worked. So George comes in. George comes over to the table, and he sits down at the table. And we say, George, we want to talk to you about the swords. So George looks at us, and he looks down at the ground, and looks back up. He says, Ernie told you, didn't he? Well, remember, Ernie was Ernie Medford. That's the guy we didn't talk to because he was sick that day. So we immediately said, of course, why we're here. Ernie told us everything. Supreme Court says we can lie to you. so George says, I knew he'd tell you. I knew it. He says, yeah. He says, I got those swords. I said, oh, okay, George. Well, you got to do the right thing and give them back. Let's go get them, and we'll take them back for you, okay? He says, okay. He says, follow me up to the house. So we start following him up the house. In the meantime, behind his back, my partner and I were high-fiving, we're going to get the swords, right? So it was pretty exciting. So we drive up to his house with him. We go in. He takes us upstairs, and he's got his bedroom door on this side. It's a 3-bedroom row house, 2 small beds and a large bedroom here. That's the master suite. There's nothing in there. Over here is one door, though. It's 2 bedrooms. And he's got all these locks on it because George was an electrician and alarms. So he unalarms everything, and he takes us in, and he says, there's a few other things. So we go into the room, and he had knocked down the wall and made a fabulous museum. George had 200 items that he had in that house. All came from the museum. And there was George, electrical contractor. There's Ernie. Of course, he was there for 20 years. And this gives you an idea. These was the 3 swords and a gun you see was the original pieces. But that other one on the end is that major sword the Historical Society said they had. George had it. They didn't know it was missing. Okay, that's $1 million on that table right there. But then we had this table, which gives you an idea how much material George had. More than 200 pieces over the course of a 7-year period that Ernie was sneaking out to George 1 piece a day. That's insider theft. So we had to get it all looked at. $2.5 million was the estimate of value. It's the largest recovery of U.S. Civil War, U.S. historical items at one time, stolen from a museum. And this gives you some close-ups, samurai swords, regular swords, all these little buttons and medals, canes. This particular piece right here, very interesting. That's a telescope. That's a telescope that was carried by Elijah Kent Kane when he discovered the pathways to the polar seas. So he's actually had that on the boat with him and used that. Give you an idea. Let's see. Go back. There's one really neat piece. I can't see it from here. No, maybe that's not it. This piece right here. This tea caddy. That was with George Washington at Valley Forge. The winter of Valley Forge when he was, huddled in. And he had that in his tent. That was where he kept his tea. So that was George Washington's tea caddy. That was in George's bedroom. So George and George, right? Never thought of that. George Washington. And it was interesting to hear George. I said to George, why'd you take this stuff? And he said, well, I met Ernie when I was doing some electrical work, and I asked Ernie, do they sell this stuff? And Ernie said, no. And I said, well, if they ever want to do it, I'll buy it. So George had paid him about $7,000 over the 7 years for $2.5 million worth of material. And his reasoning, this is interesting. Why can't I have it, he said. I like it. It was just in storage. I appreciate it. Why can't I have it? You know? And that was the mens rea. That was the mind of the thief. And I never got over that. That's why they do it. You know, you're looking into the mind. So why can't I have it? I like it. Well, George got it. George got 4 years in prison. He's out. He moved to Baltimore. And his wife was a postal worker. And she was a nice lady. And it was interesting. When I wrote the book, there's a chapter in here about HSP, about George. And his wife came to a talk I was doing at Swarthmore College. So I'm speaking at Swarthmore College. His wife's in the audience. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to talk about George because that's his neighborhood, you know? And I wasn't going to bring George's name up. So after the talk was over, I'm out signing books. And his wife walks up to my table, and she looks very stern at me, you know? And I'm thinking, oh, here we go, you know? She's probably going to hit me over the head with a book. And I'm sitting there, and her girlfriend's with her. And she looks at me, and she said, I appreciate you not talking about George. I said, yeah, I wasn't going to do that. You know, it's not fair. And her girlfriend said, well, that was nice. And she looks at me and goes, good job. So she bought a book and had me sign it for George. Can't make this stuff up, seriously. I'm sure George enjoyed it. For George. So anyway, George and Ernie were both arrested at that point, charged with theft of major artwork, stealing from a museum again, got 4-year prison sentence from a museum again, got 4-year prison sentences, $2.5 million. There's more that goes along with that, but we don't have time tonight, but it's funny. So let's talk about one more case. We can't leave. We've talked about, you know, Pennsbury Manor with the historical items, all that material from the HSP. We got to do an art piece, don't we? So this is Operation Bullwinkle. It was the theft and recovery of a Rembrandt 1630 self-portrait valued at $35 million. To set up the case, this piece, which is the Rembrandt, was stolen from the Swedish National Museum in the year 2000. This is in Stockholm, Sweden. In 2000, late December, 2 individuals went into the museum, actually it was 3 individuals, went in those doors right there off of the water, and they had machine guns. They put everybody on the floor. 2 of them then ran around the museum and stole 3 paintings, 2 Renoirs and the Rembrandt. The 2 Renoirs were valued at about $3.5 million apiece. The Rembrandt was $35 million. That's the largest art heist in Swedish national history. Happened in 2000. So what they did was, using firearms, they also set up 2 car bombs on the main roads leading to the end of the peninsula where the museum is. That stopped all the traffic from the fire department and from the police. It took them 40 minutes to get past the road closures for their response. Of course, they couldn't get away that way. They couldn't go back into the peninsula. So what they had done was they parked a high-speed boat right there at the end of the pier. So they made their getaway by jumping onto the boat and going up into the harbor. And they were able to get away scot-free. So they stole 3 paintings worth $42 million, set up car bombs, they had machine guns, and they actually put tack strips down as well past the car bombs. Pretty well thought out job, I have to say. Done very quickly. A few years later, there was a movie called The Italian Job, and they used some of the same aspects. So, art does follow life. So I had another case involving the Constitution, and then they made Independence Day or whatever it was, the one where they stole, National Treasure, kind of same thing out of Philadelphia. So these guys get away. Now they make one mistake. As they're getting off the boat, these 3 guys, they jump off the boat at a little pier, and they got these 3 paintings. There was a fisherman who saw them come in. So the next morning, when the fisherman sees the newspaper articles about the big heist, he calls the Stockholm City Police. He tells them he saw these 3 guys, and it was just suspicious. And the boat's still there. So the city police go and check out the boat. And it's still, it's got identification numbers on it. So they go and they find out where it's registered to. They go back to the owner. Of course, the owner says he sold the boat about a month before. But if you want to know, the guy gave us a credit card. I told you they were always smart. It's different things. If they were smart, we'd probably never catch them. Okay. So he had a credit card, so they could identify who they were. They then set up surveillances. Ultimately, within a year, they recovered one of the Renoirs. So one of the 3 paintings was recovered. It was the Renoir. Now, fast forward 2005, 5 years later, nothing else has been done. The Renoir is still out there, the Rembrandt. I got a call from one of our agents in Los Angeles in 2005 who was on the art crime team. We just started the team in September. I guess it's September before. His name was Chris Calarco. You might know him. Do you know Chris? You know of him? Yeah, he's a ALAT in Belgium now. Not in Denmark. Yeah. So he calls, he says, we got a case going, and there's a drug case involving a Bulgarian guy named Boris. And he said, this guy Boris is looking at 10 years in prison for drug charges. But he's also talking about selling that Renoir that was stolen in the Swedish heist in 2000. So I said, that's great, Chris. I said, if you can get leads on that, let's recover that. It would be a big recovery for the new art crime team. So he said, okay. So he calls me about 2 weeks later on Saturday morning. He says, hey, good news. We recovered the Renoir last night. The guy had it in a pawn shop in a safe. He was going to go pick it up. We did a surveillance, and as he came out with it, we stopped him, and we got the Renoir. He said, we took it up to the Getty Museum, and the curator said, that's the one. He authenticated it as the stolen piece. $3.5 million. So I said to him, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, the SAC, which is the special agent in charge in Los Angeles, wants to have a press conference on Monday. I said, well, look, go talk to Boris first. See if he knows anything about where the Rembrandt is. That's a $35 million painting. If we can get that, that'd be even better. He said, okay. So he goes back, talks to Boris, calls me. Boris knows where the Rembrandt is. It's still in Sweden, but he can introduce us into the people who have it. So we started Operation Bullwinkle at that point, which was the undercover operation to go to Sweden with Boris and try to do a buy-bust to recover that painting, that Rembrandt. And that's why we called it Operation Bullwinkle, because we had Boris the Bulgarian. There's no Natasha, no Squirrel, no Rocky, but we had Boris. And now you know how the FBI makes these names, you know? I'll tell you what, the best one I ever heard, there was 2 best ones. I'll tell you very quickly. I don't care, I'm not going anywhere, so. Anyway, the first one was Operation Bullpen. Did you work that? Yeah, out of San Diego. It was autographs, fake autographs, sports autographs. You get it? Bullpen. You know what I mean? I thought that was really a good name. Yeah, I was actually buying fake scientific autographs for that case. And another one was one that I had. It was called, I had gone to Poland, and I was doing an undercover there to recover some stolen artifacts from Zimbabwe. And I was trying to get these pieces back. And it was called Operation, trying to think of KBAS, K-B-A-S. And it was just the initials. So the case agent said, why do you want to call it KBAS? I said, because we're going to Poland, and we're going to be working with their SWAT team. So it stands for Keep Bob's Ass Safe. True story. It's actually Operation KBAS. You'll see it in the book, too. Well, those were the 2 best names after Bullwinkle, I thought. So we started this operation in Sweden. We met with the police, did everything we could do with them, found out that Boris couldn't go to Sweden because Boris had an arrest warrant. So they wouldn't let him in the country, even to help get their painting back. So we couldn't do that. So we did the next best thing. Instead of going to Norway, which is right across the border, we went to Denmark, which is 5 hours away on a train. That's because agents are geographically challenged. Okay, that's all I can say. Either that or the Legat in Finland was had a better relationship with Denmark or something. But we ended up going to this hotel, the Scandic Hotel in Copenhagen, to set up our operations. We took Boris with us. We met with the bad guys. They came down from Stockholm, and we started our discussions. It took us about 2 weeks of negotiation. And ultimately, we were using this room. This was my undercover room. And I can tell you, the reason I show it to you is because I want all of you American citizens to know we didn't waste any taxpayer dollars. Yeah. Remember, I'm big-time Russian mob authenticator here, and this is my room, right? So, but we didn't waste any money. And then we had this room. It was per diem rates for Copenhagen, and we were talking with these guys. Finally, I said to them, "Look, we've been meeting now for 2 weeks. You've done everything you could do. I've done everything I can do. It's $250,000 cash. If you do the deal, get the painting." They said, "Okay." So they left that night. Next morning, I get a call from the Swedish National Police. And they say there was a lot of movement with these 3 guys in different rooms. As it turns out, They're getting back on the train today. All three of them are back on the train, and they're heading south, and they've got an object the size of the painting in a shopping bag. They said, do you want us to stop them? I said, no. I said, let them come. Let them come down. Let's finish this off. You don't know what's going to happen. They said, okay. So I give them credit. They came all the way down to Copenhagen. They get off the train. They come towards my hotel. And then what happens is the Danish police picked up the surveillance. And you got to give them credit, the Swedes, because, you know, if this was something stolen from the Met in New York, the NYPD would never let a painting go to Canada. It wouldn't happen, right? It wouldn't happen. But in this case, they did. Hell, we wouldn't let one go from Philly to Camden in New Jersey, across the river. Wouldn't happen. Well, as it turns out, they let them go. Well, they come up to my hotel, two of them. And they come in, and I say to them, okay, let's do this deal. So they say, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to frisk them, make sure they're not carrying a gun, because I wasn't with them the night before. You know, the thing I worry about the most is what we call a reverse, where they come in and they rob me. You know, they don't bring me a painting, they just steal my money. So that's what we do. If you watch, I say to them, I don't worry about you. If you steal the money, the Russians will kill me. He says, I don't care.
I don't worry about you. I worry about the keyword.
You ever notice how, you see how they pixelate my head after you saw me? This was on television on CBS. That's why I knew about it. So we do the frisk. There's no guns. Good. No weapons. So now I have to show them the money. And that's the next best thing. There's $250,000 in cash. You can see it on the bed. That's real money. It's all $100 bills. And he's counting every bundle. And this is great because if you watch, nobody's looking at me. Notice that? Everybody's looking at the money now. And throughout the years, I'd seen this many times. So this is where I knew I had them because it's all about the Benjamins, okay? So then we do that. I say, okay, you saw the money. It's all good. Get the painting. Remember, I don't know where the painting is. The third guy had stayed outside on the corner with the bag, with the object in it the size of the painting. He was under surveillance, but he's standing out there. So they say, okay, looks good. They go, they leave. I'm sitting there waiting. About 7, 8 minutes, I get a call. It's the Swedish police and the Danish police. And they said, there's a problem. I said, what happened? He said, they ran away. I said, what do you mean they ran away? I said, well, they ran away. Do you want us to arrest them? I said, no. I said, just follow them. If they get back on the train, stop them. But don't do anything till then. I'm telling you, I was going back and forth in that little room just trying to think, what the heck did I say wrong? You know, something must have happened that tipped them off. Well, after about 7, 8 minutes, I get a call. It's the same Danish police. They say, everything's okay. I said, what happened? They said they went to another hotel. And the night before, a fourth guy had come down. He had the painting. The bag was just a decoy. So had we stopped them or had the police stopped them on the train or anything like that, it would have been nothing. All right. As it turned out, they had a decoy. So they were doing a counter surveillance against us to see if we were police. So as a result, they had already arrested the fourth guy in the other room. The other three were coming back with the painting. So they bring the painting back up. We have to authenticate it.
And you go into a dark, go in the bedroom.
At this point, I'm just looking at it with a fake blue light, a black light, you know, trying to get more evidence out of them. And you can see the size of it. It's not very big, but it's worth $35 million. And that's what makes it really interesting. It's, you know, artwork is not contraband per se. It's not money, drugs, or guns. Money, drugs, or guns, right? Contraband. Contraband is material that's just illegal to possess. Artwork is just artwork. So unless somebody knows what they're looking for, they're not going to know it's stolen. So at this point, he's got this small piece worth $35 million that's been stolen. So we know it's real. The reason I knew it was real is because I had looked at the back and front pictures from the museum. There were 4 screws that held that painting into the frame from the back, and the screws were turned at certain angles. And I could see that these angles were still the same. So they never took the painting out of the frame. So I said to them, I said, you never took the painting out of the frame, did you? And they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, of course not, it's a Rembrandt. I said, excuse me, you know? That's a little, you know, a little promo to Steve Martin, remember? And I'll tell you, I was at the Frick giving a talk, and Steve Martin was in the audience. And I said that, and he laughed. And I said, I'll send you a check. You know? But I really did say that. And they looked at me and they said, of course not. And I said, okay, well, it just goes to show. I said, well, are you guys art lovers? They said, no, we just want the money. But the point is, even they knew what they had. They had a real Rembrandt from 1630 when he was 24 years old, done on copper with gold in the paint, gold flecks. Very valuable metal in 1630, believe me. So very interesting. So anyway, we did that. We knew it was real at that point. There's nothing left to do. So the code word, this is a done deal. That's the word I always used. This is a done deal. So when I say that, you're going to see the Danish police SWAT team break in the door, come rushing in, save me, save the painting, and arrest these terrible people, okay? These criminals with guns. They didn't have any guns that day, but usually. Anyway, so they're going to arrest these guys and save the day. Watch.
Well, you look like a postcard.
Listen closely, for this is a done deal.
If it gets right. We got a done deal.
Done deal. You heard it, right? Here we come. We're going to go. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Oh, hell. There we go. All right, thank God. All right. I was hiding in the bathroom. It's a good place to be. I used to teach in the undercover school. I used to tell guys, go hide in the bathtub, because then when the bullets were flying, you'd be in a bathtub, protect you. And then I ran down the hall, and I took the painting, and I gave it to Chris. He was there, the Calarca, the agent from Los Angeles was there. And we took it upstairs to the safe room. We put it on the bed, and I put the $250,000 in front of the painting. And I never thought I'd ever show anybody this picture, but it was for my own scrapbook. But I think it's a great picture for these to understand what this is all about. That's why people steal paintings. It's for the Benjamins, for the money. So that's $250,000 in cash in front of a $35 million painting. How many people here are fishermen? Do we have any fishermen in here? In Las Vegas? Nobody? Well, if you've been fishing, you know about when you catch a good fish. Well, this is the fish shot. Okay. Yes, we've got to take a picture for the fish shot. It's a good case to talk about for two reasons. Because it shows the importance of cultural heritage. It shows that 3 countries, what else can you think of? They wouldn't have done it for a Chevrolet. Three countries, Sweden, Denmark, the United States, worked together, our national police forces, to recover that painting. That's a piece of property, but it's an important piece of property for all of us. Not just the museum, but for all of our civilizations. Because it's our history, And so it is more important than just a single piece of property. It's our history and our heritage. And that's why we work together to get these pieces back. And now today, that was back in 2005. Today I retired, and these are pieces I've recovered since then for the FBI, also for victims. This piece was stolen in I think this is neat, 1970. And if you look closely, you see this little girl here? That's her. And she called me, she's 50 years old now, or 55, and she said, my painting's being sold at an auction in Dallas. Can you help me? And we did. We were able to get it back for her. And that's the painting. But that's how we could prove it was hers, because that's her. Okay. Yeah, Margaret Keane painting. Not real valuable, $35,000, something like that, but very important to the family. And we just did this case with the art crime team involving a forger down in Fort Pierce. And this is a piece I recovered out of New York in 2018. Washington, D.C. Office there was able to recover this with information I'd given them. It was stolen from New York in 1987. So we get together with them and work all the time as well.
You travel the world.
Yes.
You're like Rene Russo in the Thomas Crown Affair. I'm sure you look just as good in a lace dress. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Robert Wittman, Art Cop. The book is priceless.
I think it's like, I don't know, $17? I don't know, whatever they're charging in the back. So if you want a copy of the book, come on back. All these cases are in the book, plus many more. I'm happy to sign them for you. And thank you for coming out tonight. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Shaquille, are you still here?
Shaquilla had to run out to the airport, but we are going to do a Q&A for a few minutes. I have one from online. Let me just pull it up.
Hey, how many people do we have online?
Oh, I don't know.
You know, if it's less than 2,000, don't tell me.
So here's a question from the audience member watching at home. Who authenticates recovered work to determine if they're the real thing?
Good question. Depends on the item. You know, if it's a baseball card, you know, there's companies. PSA is one of them. There's a number of different companies that could do that. If it's a painting, we would go to the experts who are the connoisseurs. Sometimes there has to be a forensic investigation as well. It all depends on the situation. But the FBI does have a plethora of experts they can go to. Archaeologists, connoisseurs, and forensic experts. Right, Ray? That was a good answer, wasn't it?
All right, we'll grab this one over here. Oh, here you go. Oh, so everybody.
So you said it's all about the money, but these people aren't trying to turn around and resell it, other than the last one that you gave them some money, not as near as much as what it was worth. So if it's about the money, they're not trying to resell stuff.
Well, in all the cases I just told you about, they tried to resell it. Remember that the pickers had stolen from the museum? We're going to take it to auction. The guys that stole, George and Ernie, George told us that, he was waiting for Ernie to die so that there'd be no lead back to him so he could start selling things. Yeah, so everybody ultimately they're all interested in trying to make money. Now, there are collectors, okay, who steal for their own enjoyment because they love things. I mean, that happens. It doesn't happen as much as people think. There was a famous James Bond movie called Dr. No, and what had happened there was, it really wasn't part of the original script. One of the producers had read an article in the London Times about a stolen Goya painting that had been stolen from one of the museums. I think it was the British Museum the year before. And what he did was he thought that was a really neat story. So he had a copy made, and he used it in the movie. So at one point, James Bond's going into Dr. No's caverns, and he sees the stolen Goya on an easel. And he has the idea, like, I wonder where that went, So Dr. No has these stolen paintings. And that became famous. That's the theory, the Dr. No theory. What's really interesting is that reproduction was stolen after the movie, yeah. That's a funny story. But anyway, that's where we all think of these rich guys in their basement staring at stolen artwork. I never saw it. I've seen collectors who steal small items, but never saw million-dollar paintings, that way.
All right, we have a question back here.
In regards to the Gardner Museum heist, in March of 2013.
Now, you can hear that Boston accent, right?
Yeah.
The Gardner Museum heist.
Revere in East Boston.
You're going to park the car?
SAC Delorier stated that they believe they are aware who committed the heist of the Gardner Museum. However, that press conference was overshadowed by the marathon bomb a couple weeks later. But is it your opinion that they have yet to release the names of who's responsible for that? Is it your opinion that if they do release the names, that might assist in the recovery of some of the art?
Well, I think that, my personal opinion is if they said they're dead. The FBI says they're dead. So the reason they didn't release the names is because there was no charges, and they're dead. So, as far as releasing their names leading to leads, I think the FBI would have run all those leads out according to to knowing who the dead guys are. What do you think, Ray?
I think, Sammy, that we'll get sued if we release an uncharged subject.
Yeah, we could get sued if we release an uncharged subject's name. So that could be. Yeah, family reputation is important. So they didn't release the names. How they know that these guys did it, I don't know. I don't know. It's funny though. I don't really care at this point who did it, because after 30 years, they probably aren't going to get charged. And if they're dead anyway, who cares? I care about getting the paintings back. So, and it's funny too. Remember I was telling you I did that operation in France. It was very difficult because of French laws, but under French laws, those paintings aren't stolen anymore. It's not a criminal situation for them because, number one, their statute of limitations has run, and they weren't stolen in France. So, they're actually kind of legal in other countries. So, it's a weird situation. When you start working internationally, you have to follow the statutes in those countries. It's not necessarily what the United States does. I had a stolen painting, Mark Rothko, that was taken out of St. Louis. is sold through Chicago to New York to Tokyo. In Tokyo, in Japan, under Japanese law, if any object that's stolen is sold and a real price is paid for it, after 2 years, the buyer has good title. It's Japanese law. So, yeah, it doesn't count here, so they could never sell it in the United States, but as long as he kept it in Japan, he legally owned it. Ultimately, he gave it back because it was of no value to him. And, it was bad for his honor to keep a stolen object. And he got his money back from the dealer, which was a good thing. So I just say, you have to follow the laws of the countries.
All right, I think we have time for one more if anyone has a question. Oh, all right.
Oh, hi. I was wondering if you think that maybe the real art theft is like stealing, or I guess taking artifacts from certain countries and then hosting them in museums in other countries. Like the Elgin marbles from Greece, them being in the British Museum is kind of controversial, I guess. I know you're not like an art expert, a historian, but if you have any opinions about that.
Isn't that a cool picture? That was the next picture. And, the PowerPoint's over, but that's my next picture in the PowerPoint. And what that is a pair of horses, Chinese horses, that were taken off of a tomb in China. And these things are monumental, they're huge. And today they're at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. The guy you see there is the one who sold them to the museum in 1920. And if you look closely at these two statues, look here, you see the cuts? That's how they got them off the wall. You see the cuts? They literally cut them off of the wall in the Chinese tomb to be able to transport them to Pennsylvania. And he was a big Chinese antiques dealer. So yeah, there's things all over the world. Here I'll show you this is what they look like. See where they're located? Yeah. The government of China has asked for them back, and we're helping them negotiate that. But it happens. You're right. There are stolen properties all over the world. But times have changed, and things have been removed and put into museums 100 years ago. Sometimes don't fall under all the same statutes and laws as today. You had the new UNESCO treaties that were passed. The United States got involved in around 1980, right, somewhere around there. And since then, we've kind of come along with it. But once you start, it's a slippery slope to a certain degree. You have to be careful of that too, because everything we have in our museums that don't come from here, come from somewhere, right? And if you start returning everything to everywhere, ultimately you have nothing left in your museums. So it's a question. It really is. It's a question. You talk about the Elgin marbles. When they were collected, Turkey was the country in charge of Greece, and they were given by the Turkish to Lord Elgin. So literally, legally, they were acquired legally from the owners who were the leaders of the country. So it's problematic, but that's not my job. Not my job, man. I just do the best we can. We all got to do the best we can and be careful. So thanks again for coming. Appreciate it. Fun.